welcome to Love Always Self. I'm Shira.
Hi, y'all. I'm Karista, and welcome to Love Always Self. Thank you so much for joining us today on this episode where we're not really 100% sure what we're talking about. We discussed a couple things, and it's funny because sometimes we'll try to put in the effort towards like researching topics, but I just feel like it's so much easier to just have conversations sometimes.
Yeah, it is. It is. So we're going to wing it.
Yep.
Cool. You guys are along for that ride. Lord knows how many bloopers will come out of this episode. And then we hope you are enjoying those bloopers. We started implementing them back in May, I believe.
I believe so. Yeah, at the beginning of May. So if you haven't checked out social medias, go ahead and slide on over to Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok and
YouTube Shorts.
And YouTube Shorts at Love Always Self, and check those out. Have a little laugh.
And while you're on YouTube, if you are, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell.
Ding, ding. Wait, did we both just ding, ding?
I think we did. Mine felt more silent in my head, but it was like implied with my thumbs ups. So, oh my goodness. We were having a moment. I'll talk about mine for just a second because I feel like I'm in all sorts of chaos today. I was sitting there and I was like transitioning from doing some other work and then trying to be present. But at the same time, my eyes started feeling like it was like I got punched in the face. And then like as we were sitting here doing...
Just to clarify, there was no violence that occurred.
Yeah, there was no violence. And as I'm sitting here with you today, like it's just started like feeling like it was getting worse. And then it started burning. Mm-hmm. Then I went and like ran all the way downstairs and grabbed an eye rinse. Meanwhile, I'm trying to text my husband and ask him if he can pick up Webster, our dog, from the groomers. I'm waiting for them to text. And I was like, oh my God, what time do they close? And I was like, oh, right, we got to get our show notes done. And it was just like, I couldn't stay focused on a single thing. Like my attention span was not staying focused on a single thing for longer than a few seconds. Mm-hmm. And so I was bouncing between all of these things. Meanwhile, my brain is just like, what's happening? Yeah. And all of this is just like kind of going on. And she makes a joke that we've been joking about for a few days now, but she made a joke about, and they say you can do multitasking. And I was like, dude, no, you can't.
Like there are some things where, yes, you multitask, like talk on the phone, walk down the street, and chew gum at the same time. Yeah. I'm not saying that people do that well. I'm just saying that people do that. And there's other small instances where I think that multitasking may be valid, like eating and watching a show at the same time.
Until you drop something on your chest, yes, or in your lap.
Well, that just requires additional practice on how to eat.
But this was my thought process, right? I was like, how are you actually able to multitask when all I think you're really doing is shifting your awareness rapidly? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And sometimes it seems like it's at the exact same time, but your eyes are not exactly focused, physically at least speaking. Your eyes are not focused on two different things at once unless you have two sets of eyeballs.
Unless you're a clone.
Or you're a clone.
But then again, you're still not doing it. Your clone is.
Exactly. This is what I'm talking about.
So yeah, we were talking about how multitasking is kind of a crock of shit and how it's not a real thing.
Yeah.
And we were just kind of like sitting here and spitballing about like, well, how is that related to spirituality? Mm-hmm. And really it keeps this chaotic energy flowing within you. And we've talked about this previously, and we'll link the episode below, but your mind just gets in this hamster wheel to the point where it's almost hard to stop and find rest and solitude and create a peaceful environment internally and externally.
I agree. And we literally, before hitting record, we both were just like, okay, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to close my eyes, mostly because this one's hurting. And then as I closed my eyes, as I remembered, drop the tongue from the roof of your mouth, relax your shoulders, take in a deep breath. And then I immediately knew to do my light meditation, imagining that light coming from, my higher self and from source and going all the way through each of my chakras and then down into the earth for grounding purposes, because I think that's definitely what I'm lacking today is grounding. And just remembering that has like slowly but surely
kind of like tempered out the frequency a little bit.
Right. It definitely did. And although there are times, and I'm thinking about this while I'm saying all of this, right? There are definitely times where I'm like, I don't have the luxury, or I'm going to rather say, I have decided that I'm not making the time and calling that a luxury to slow it down for a minute, right? Sometimes, I feel like I don't have the luxury. And I'm just being clear when I say that I know that I'm choosing to say it that way. I'm choosing to take the stance that I'm not making enough time to do the things that will allow me to bring myself back to center, to, reduce the anxiety that I feel like I need to move at a very rapid pace versus putting up my boundaries and saying, yo, all of this can be prioritized. I'm not in the fire department, for instance. And for those of you, we salute you for your service. So thank you. Mm-hmm. But I'm not in a situation where everything's an emergency, but yet sometimes it just feels like everything is an emergency.
And people act like it, the way the words that they choose, it really triggers you into action. And, right before we hopped on, we were, like I said, we were trying to do a little bit of like, how do we talk about this and incorporate this with spirituality? And it was funny because you found an article and you were reading it. And as you were reading it, you got like super overwhelmed. And it was because like all of these messages from like coworkers, from your husband, from another friend, like people reaching out constantly. And again, like it's that multitasking thing where you're not really doing two things at once. Your attention is being pulled in different directions so fast. And unfortunately, I think this actually reduces your productivity and the quality of the work that happens because you're having to switch back and forth so often that you kind of may not forget, but you may.
You may. And you do. I know I do. And if I didn't make it a habit to start writing things down in a to-do list format, there's no way I'd be able to remember all the things that are coming at me every day. Mm-hmm. If I've decided to not take action towards that right then and there, I have to put it on a to-do list and set it aside. And sometimes I do that for my own personal knowing that I don't have the ability to multitask on that at the moment, right?
And it relieves some anxiety around potentially forgetting.
Exactly.
And not even taking care of the thing. So that is a helpful thing. I definitely love lists. I love lists. And I take advantage of them regularly, whether it's just, I told you I journal quite frequently. Sometimes that journaling includes things that I want to get done.
Yeah.
And then I look back and I'm like, wow, look at all the things that I accomplished. And it kind of makes me laugh because I was just thinking about how after I've had a busy weekend and I've got a lot of things done, my spouse will be like, oh, so you had a really productive weekend. And I was just thinking, I was like, productive doesn't necessarily mean joyful.
Oh my gosh. This is so true. Sometimes it does.
Sometimes.
Because you're like,
I can breathe.
I got that thing off my list. You're like, but then there's always the next thing to do.
Right. There's no downtime, really. But that also speaks to actually taking responsibility to creating that space. Like you said earlier with setting the boundaries. Nobody is going to set those boundaries for you.
Right.
Nobody's going to stop reaching out and take a rest. So you have to provide that time and space for the rest for you.
I agree. Mm-hmm. I also think it's important that if everyone continues to be house on fire and and participates in playing into those actions on a daily basis, you might not realize what you're doing, but you're perpetuating the everyone needs to be house on fire at all times. And I was thinking about that the other day, and I was like, okay, I'm listening to what you're considering as urgent, and I'm now asking why it's urgent, but it's not translating in my head as something urgent, but the person I was speaking to was freaking out, right? And so I was just kind of like, where does that come from? Where did that start? This need to like shift as fast as humanly possible, almost as if we're the physical AIs or the physical machines that are all being like implemented out there. We're not machines. We are human beings. We are meant to slow it down when needed.
We do require rest.
We require rest, right?
It is a physiological need.
Our plugged into the wall recharging is when we sleep or relax,
Yeah.
or find joy
Exactly.
or take breaths or reduce the anxiety, because the more we perpetuate this need to try to multitask as fast as humanly possible and increasing our anxiety, which I'm sure everyone nowadays has probably noticed that the anxiety has increased in the population by I don't know how much. And then you add on rabbit hole here, but you add on all the chemicals in our products and our food and the fast, rapid production of food, because attention spans can't stay longer than 60 seconds, I think is the standard now. You know what I'm saying? Like all of this is just perpetuating the issues that we have with our health and our physical forms.
It's this expectation to have everything done or ready for us yesterday.
Yeah.
Whether that's food, whether that's work, whether that's, a relationship, like you're expected to have done it already, and be done.
Yeah. And the only way that you can keep up with that is to think that you're a multitasker.
And on top of that, like our society has maybe unknowingly, I think as a collective, perpetuated that. I agree with you with all of the technology, because while technology has made our life easier in some degree, it's also made our life a lot harder in others because of this expectation to always be doing, because this expectation to always be connected and always be available.
I would definitely say that rewinding back to the start-ish of 2020, end of 2020, start of 2020. When did the COVID happen?
At the beginning.
At the beginning. So back at the start of the of 2020, I mean, I think that actually did not help us in that way. I think it required us to all slow down and really evaluate what's important and what you're wanting and what feels good and what doesn't feel good and all those fun things. I think that was very helpful. A lot of people awakened during those times.
I did not get that during that time frame. I worked harder, longer hours for the same amount of money.
No, but that was the other flip side,
Yeah.
right? Is that even though you were in maybe a space that allowed you to wear yoga pants and a t-shirt, right? Or some boxers, whatevs, from the waist down, but like you were still probably working more hours. And so now there's the driving has been brought back in. The social life has been brought back in. The being able to like not just get your groceries picked up at the curb. Most people are probably going back inside. Like all of these things have been brought back into the realm, but I don't see that the slowing down of what it was like when you were, all you had to do was work because that's all you had. Couldn't do anything else.
Right.
So it just feels like the need to multitask, I'm just bringing that back in here, but the need to multitask feels greater than it ever was prior to that. Like I'm just remembering these days before 2020. And I remember clocking out from work, no physical clock, you guys, but like leaving work and my day was done for the job, right? Like for the most part, I went and did things. I knew that I had time to do that. And I made time to do that.
That's what's kind of wild now for me thinking back. It doesn't feel like I have the same amount of time as I did in 2019, like in a day.
Isn't that crazy?
It is. Like, I don't know if I'm just like tired or like lower energy or feeling drained from, work, that it just feels like I can't do the things, but I feel like I'm doing things all the time.
I know. It is kind of weird. I'm not really sure, like, outside of what my thought process was just on, I'm not really sure what I think might have actually happened. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you were going to try to drill down into it, like, what actually happened?
Right. I don't know. I mean, I have read several reports. Again, I haven't validated this information, so don't take my word for it. But there were several reports saying that the Earth is spinning faster, but it's by milliseconds. And that doesn't explain to me why it feels like I have like at least 1 hour less per day. At least. Or time literally feels like it's moving faster. But millisecond doesn't explain it to me.
I mean, one could claim that it is part of the expanded consciousness. But at the same time, I've also, when in a better place, I've seen it slow down. When I'm not in high anxiety, when I'm having fun.
That is true.
It seems to slow down.
Which is interesting because normally you remember there's the
time flies when you're having fun.
Exactly. That is another adage. and you and I experienced this recently, like within the last couple of weeks, where the day moved by really fast. Mm-hmm. But when you and I got together, we had a great time, but it moved so slow. And we were like, this is the best.
This is the best. Don't ever let it end.
Yeah. How do we get that more regularly?
We implement more fun in our lives. We start incorporating our work as something fun for us. And that's the thing. And that gets everybody, because so many of us, because I'm going to include myself in that, we feel the everyday stresses and we're just exhausted from it. And I think that those stresses are really perpetuated by the requirement to multitask so freaking often in order to accomplish anything.
And the everything's on fire attitude.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, like everything's on fire. That is speaking to survival mode, which is connected to the experience of anxiety. And so it's literally perpetuating anxiety collectively. Like,
that's exactly right.
As its own pandemic. And it's going to be our responsibility to break the cycle within ourselves.
It is. It is our responsibility. And we've got to take those steps. We talk about taking action towards manifestation. It's so important to just take the first step forward into what it is that you're looking to do and how you want to do it. How do you want to live your life? Do you want to live your life in the full perception of multitasking, which think about that as far as like if it's actually multitasking or just moving rapidly. And do you want to do that? Because some people might thrive in those kind of conditions. Right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Some people are loving this. Great. Good for them.
Yeah. And then there's some of us that are like, okay, I can do this for a certain period of time. But then after that, my burnout kicks in, my exhaustion kicks in, my anxiety goes up. And then by the time I'm done, I'm so worn out that I'm mentally feeling exhausted, even though I'm not physically exhausted. Mm-hmm. It's having an impact on my ability to do things in a physical nature. And so that's kind of why it's your choice, right? It's your choice. But as long as you're aware of it and you're opening your awareness to it and you're taking whatever steps towards creating the life that you want, maybe start with I'm going to take my own advice here because I'm winging this one, but I'm going to take my own advice. The first thing I think I know I have to do is set the boundaries, right? I started with the block scheduling. That got superseded last week, big time. And so now I've got to remember, hey, that week felt chaotic for you because you tried to implement something, you were following it, things were going great. You decided not to do that anymore for a week because maybe you thought you could get away with not. And then poof, now you're back into anxiety mode and chaos.
But, that gave you that feedback that you needed.
Practice.
Mm-hmm. That what you were doing was actually working. And when you stopped doing it, that's not working. And so it was that reassurance that was appropriate for you. That was helpful.
It was my lesson learned. As I was sitting there explaining what I was just explaining, I started thinking about, I haven't received my message from the groomer that my dog is ready to be picked up. Do you see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
it's like wild today.
So, I wanted to go back to what you were talking about, or what you mentioned about trying to incorporate fun in your work. And I know that it can be difficult, especially if you're not feeling in alignment with the work that you're doing. You mentioned lists. So writing the list down and then picking one of the things and focusing on that.
Right.
And finding joy in that moment. So let me give you an example, like doing dishes. Okay. You look in the sink, you see a sink full of dishes, and that's overwhelming. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't like doing dishes.
To some, it's overwhelming to some. I've seen some people's apartments.
It's overwhelming to me. And rather than seeing the whole pile, you grab one plate and then you wash it. And you don't just wash it. You watch how your hand dances across the plate, and how the suds, the soap suds, they start building, and then they just rinse off, and it's just like this flow down the drain,
Alan
washing
Watts, right?
away. Yep, you listened to it.
I did.
Washing away what was old, and then you move on to the next one. But narrowing that focus, because when it's such a wide focus, that for sure gets so overwhelming for me.
Yeah.
So that's a way that you can kind of incorporate a little bit of play in what you're doing, is just, again, touching back on that inner child and finding things that are magical about it.
I agree. It's hard. I'm not going to lie, just a little rebuttal, but it's hard when you're doing something that you're not enjoying.
Absolutely.
And I remember somebody was once talking to me about, or I heard somebody talking about this, about taxes. And it was David Lyon. I remember watching this on one of David Lyon's lives, and they were like, well, how do you make taxes fun? And he was like, you just do it. He's like, what I do is I just pump myself up, right? I'm like, you know what? Every time I do taxes, I have this one song that I get to play, and I'm going to listen to that. And then it like goes off on it and makes the situation into a fun thing, even though he knows that it's got to be, or he lets go of the resistance of doing it in the first place. And I was like, ooh, letting go of the resistance of doing it in the first place. And like, now in my mind, I'm like, that doesn't mean that I give up on my dreams because I've found a way to cope with the current one. Right. So, but it does at least give me a little reprieve while I'm taking the actions to get to the next thing that I want to enjoy.
I think that's really poignant. Like, you're right. We do develop a lot of coping mechanisms to just help ourselves be okay in a situation that we're really uncomfortable in. Yeah. And while that may be necessary to do for a time period to support yourself during a transition to something different, not just quitting and being okay with the lesser joy or the lesser comfort, but recognizing that you're having to cope. And then, like we've talked about, I feel like a good handful of times, daydream.
Yeah.
And then start putting those into action steps.
Yeah. And with that,
so, guys, we have decided that we're going to nix the collective card reading today. We need a break from all the different things. Not sure if you could tell.
Literally cannot focus on another thing right now. Literally. I might explode. You might get to witness that.
Again, no violence occurred to create this episode today.
Oh my gosh.
So I hope that in this day and age of fast-paced, everything needs to happen now, that you are able to create space for yourself and create those boundaries that support your well-being and your joy and your happiness. And you find a way to release that stress and that anxiety in a healthy way. So whether that's exercise, whether that's getting with friends and having a good time and laughter and jokes or whatever it is, I hope that you do that for yourself.
I do too. And I also hope that if you're liking our content, you hit that like, subscribe, notification bells so you stay notified for future episodes.
Again, if you need a good laugh, head over to the socials, find those bloopers at Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and YouTube Shorts at Love Always Self.
We have a website,
lovealwaysself.com.
When we are doing collective card readings, unlike on this episode, all of those cards are listed in our Amazon shop. We get kickback for those, and we appreciate you for assisting our channel grow.
And I hope you have a great rest of your day, you guys. So don't forget to love first,
love last,
and love always.
Bye, everybody.
Hey, listener, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us in this moment. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we look forward to our next connection.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow to stay notified of new content from Love Always Self. If you have any questions or topics you'd like for us to discuss, please hit us up on any of our social media platforms linked in the show notes below.
I'm Karista.
And I'm Shira.
And until next time, remember to love first,
love last,
and love always. Love Always Self podcast is meant for entertainment purposes only. We do not make any warranties about the completeness, reliability, and accuracy of the information presented in this podcast. Any action you choose to take upon the information in this podcast is strictly done so at your own risk, and we will not be held liable for any losses and damages in connection with the use of our podcast. Any and all medical concerns should be addressed with a licensed healthcare provider, as well as any questions that may be derived from the information discussed in this podcast.